Tensions rise on live TV when Robert Pattinson and Sunny Hostin clash, and the moment shocks everyone. What happens when a routine conversation on live television takes an unexpected turn, and a guest known for keeping things measured finds himself pushed into a sharper exchange than anyone anticipated? Make sure to subscribe to Table Turn and like and comment for more real talk show coverage. The segment begins the way many daytime talk show conversations do, with a calm introduction and a familiar rhythm that regular viewers instantly recognize. The studio lights are bright, the audience is settled, and the panel is seated comfortably behind the desk. Robert Pattinson is introduced as the guest of the day, there to promote a new project and talk a bit about his career, his recent choices in film, and how he approaches fame at this stage of his life. There's applause as he walks out, polite but enthusiastic, the kind of response that suggests curiosity more than frenzy. Pattinson takes a seat, exchanges greetings with the hosts, and the conversation starts on safe ground. At first, everything feels relaxed. The hosts ask about his latest role, how he balances independent films with bigger studio projects, and what drew him to this particular script. Pattinson answers thoughtfully, with his usual understated humor, occasionally pausing to choose his words carefully. The panel laughs lightly at a self-deprecating comment about how he still gets nervous watching himself on screen. The tone is easy, conversational, and familiar to anyone who watches daytime television regularly. As the discussion moves forward, the conversation shifts slightly toward fame and public scrutiny. One of the co-hosts brings up how Pattinson became famous at a relatively young age and how public attention has evolved since then, especially in the age of social media. Pattinson responds by saying that he's learned to keep a certain distance, explaining that constant online commentary can distort how people see themselves. He mentions that he tries not to read too much into headlines or trending opinions, emphasizing the importance of focusing on the work rather than the noise. This is where Sunny Hostin begins to lean in, figuratively and literally. Her posture changes slightly, and she picks up on Pattinson's comments about public discourse and responsibility. When she speaks, her tone is calm but purposeful, the way viewers are accustomed to hearing when she's about to steer the conversation into more serious territory. She acknowledges his point about protecting mental health, but adds that public figures also have influence, whether they want it or not. She frames it as a question, asking how he reconciles stepping back from public commentary while benefiting from a platform that reaches millions. Pattinson listens attentively, nodding as she speaks. When he responds, he clarifies that he's not advocating silence on important issues, but rather being cautious about speaking on topics he doesn't feel fully informed about. He explains that he worries about oversimplifying complex issues or unintentionally misleading people. His delivery remains even, but there's a noticeable shift in the room's energy. The conversation is no longer just about movies. It's edging into a broader discussion about celebrity, influence, and responsibility. Sunny follows up, and this is where the exchange begins to feel more tense, though still controlled. She says that while caution is understandable, there are moments when neutrality itself sends a message. Her voice remains steady, but her words carry weight. She references how audiences, especially younger viewers, often look to well-known figures for cues on how to think or act, even when those figures don't intend to lead. The studio audience grows quieter, sensing that the conversation has moved beyond promotional talk. Pattinson shifts slightly in his chair before answering. He takes a moment, which on live television feels longer than it probably is. He says that he understands the point, but doesn't agree that every public figure is obligated to comment on every issue. He explains that he believes authenticity matters more than visibility, and that speaking just to be seen can sometimes do more harm than good. His tone remains respectful, but there's a firmness there now that wasn't present earlier. As he speaks, one of the other co-hosts attempts to soften the moment, interjecting briefly to note that different celebrities handle their platforms differently. There's a quick nod from Sunny, but she doesn't fully let go of the thread. When she resumes, her body language is composed but direct. She points out that silence can be interpreted in many ways, especially in moments of social tension, and that choosing not to speak is still a choice with consequences. The audience reacts subtly. A few murmurs ripple through the crowd, not loud enough to disrupt the broadcast, but noticeable in the background. Some viewers lean forward in their seats. This is the kind of exchange that daytime audiences recognize immediately, not an argument, but a clear disagreement unfolding in real time, with both sides holding their ground politely. Pattinson responds again, and this time there's a slight change in his pacing. He speaks a bit more slowly, emphasizing his words. He says that he doesn't believe anyone should feel pressured to perform concern publicly to prove their values. He adds that meaningful action often happens privately, away from cameras and social media. As he finishes, he offers a small, almost apologetic smile, signaling that he's aware of the sensitivity of the topic. Sunny listens without interrupting, her expression thoughtful but firm. When she replies, she acknowledges that private action is important but reiterates that public statements can validate the experiences of people who feel unheard. Her tone remains measured, but the contrast in viewpoints is now unmistakable. The hosts exchange quick glances, the kind that suggest an awareness of the delicate balance required to keep the conversation constructive. The moderator steps in gently, thanking both of them for sharing their perspectives and attempting to steer the discussion back toward common ground. She frames the exchange as an example of how complicated the relationship between fame and responsibility can be. There's a brief pause, filled with polite laughter and a few nods from the panel, as if everyone is collectively acknowledging that the conversation has reached a momentary peak. Even as the topic shifts slightly, the tension doesn't disappear entirely. Pattinson's posture remains attentive, but more reserved than before. Sunny sits back in her chair, hands folded, her expression calm but reflective. The audience applause that follows the transition feels supportive but subdued, signaling appreciation for the honest exchange rather than excitement. As the segment continues, it's clear that something meaningful has happened on air. Nothing explosive, nothing inappropriate for daytime television, but a genuine clash of perspectives that viewers can feel. The conversation has moved from lighthearted promotion to a thoughtful, if tense, discussion about influence, choice, and public expectation. And as the cameras roll on, there's an unspoken understanding that this moment will likely linger with viewers long after the show cuts to commercial, setting the stage for reactions and interpretations that will unfold once the episode airs. As the cameras return from the brief transition, the atmosphere in the studio feels slightly altered, even though the set looks exactly the same. This is something longtime viewers of daytime talk shows tend to notice instinctively. The smiles are still there, the panel remains composed, but there's a subtle recalibration happening in real time. The conversation has crossed into more serious territory, and everyone at the table seems aware that how they proceed matters. The moderator resumes by acknowledging that conversations like this are the reason the show exists in the first place. She mentions that different perspectives are what make the panel dynamic and that respectful disagreement can be valuable for viewers at home. Her tone is warm and steady, clearly intended to ground the discussion and reassure the audience that the exchange is healthy, not hostile. There's a light ripple of applause, more supportive than enthusiastic, signaling that the audience understands the shift and is on board. Sunny nods as the moderator speaks, and when she picks up the conversation again, her approach is slightly adjusted. She doesn't restate her earlier argument directly, but reframes it through a broader lens. She talks about the responsibility of media platforms as a whole, not just individuals, and how daytime television often serves as a space where complicated issues are introduced to a wide audience. Her voice is calm, almost instructional, and her body language has softened. She leans back slightly, hands relaxed, signaling that she's not looking for confrontation but clarification. Pattinson listens closely, his eyes focused on Sunny as she speaks. When it's his turn to respond, he begins by saying that he appreciates the way the show encourages these kinds of discussions. This opening feels deliberate, a way to acknowledge the platform without conceding his position. He explains that he often struggles with the expectation that visibility equals obligation, especially when the nuances of an issue can't be fully explored in a soundbite or a single post. As he talks, his tone remains even, but there's a noticeable seriousness in his expression. He gestures lightly with his hands, not dramatically, but enough to emphasize his points. He says that he's seen situations where well-intentioned statements were taken out of context or reduced to headlines that didn't reflect the speaker's actual views. In those moments, he argues the conversation can become less about understanding and more about performance. One of the co-hosts interjects briefly, offering a perspective that bridges the two positions. She suggests that perhaps the challenge lies in finding ways for public figures to engage thoughtfully without feeling forced into constant commentary. Her comment is met with nods around the table, including from Sunny, who acknowledges the point with a small smile. The audience responds with a soft murmur of agreement, indicating that many viewers are processing the discussion in real time. Sunny then turns back to Pattinson, and this time her question is more specific. She asks how he personally decides when to speak and when to step back. It's framed less as a challenge and more as an invitation for insight. This shift in tone is subtle but important, signaling a move away from debate and toward understanding. Pattinson takes another pause before answering, and the silence feels intentional rather than awkward. He explains that he often consults with people he trusts, listens to voices directly affected by the issue, and reflects on whether his contribution would add clarity or simply noise. He admits that it's not a perfect system and that he's made mistakes, but he emphasizes that the decision to speak should come from a place of responsibility, not pressure. As he finishes, there's a brief moment where no one speaks, and the studio audience remains quiet. This kind of pause is rare on live television, and it underscores the weight of what's being discussed. The moderator steps in again, thanking Pattinson for his honesty and noting that these decisions are rarely straightforward. Sunny responds by saying she appreciates his transparency and clarifies that her concern comes from seeing how silence can sometimes feel dismissive to people who are looking for acknowledgement. Her tone is gentle, and she makes a point of saying that she's not questioning his values, but rather highlighting a broader pattern she's observed in media culture. This clarification seems to ease some of the tension, and Pattinson nods in acknowledgement. The audience reacts with light applause, a signal that they appreciate the respectful tone of the exchange. It's the kind of response that suggests viewers feel included in the conversation rather than polarized by it. The panelists exchange brief smiles, and the moderator takes the opportunity to pivot slightly, asking Pattinson how these considerations have influenced his choices in roles and projects. This question brings the discussion back toward his professional life, but the earlier exchange continues to inform the tone. Pattinson talks about gravitating toward stories that explore moral complexity and ambiguity, rather than clear-cut answers. He says that he's drawn to characters who reflect the uncertainty many people feel in real life, especially in times of social change. As he speaks, Sunny listens attentively, occasionally nodding. When he mentions that art can be a way to engage with difficult topics without issuing direct statements, she agrees, adding that storytelling often reaches people in ways commentary cannot. This moment of agreement feels genuine and helps reestablish a sense of balance at the table. One of the other co-hosts makes a lighthearted remark about how audiences often expect celebrities to have definitive answers, even though most people don't. The comment draws a small laugh from Pattinson and a ripple of laughter from the audience, easing the atmosphere further. It's a reminder that daytime talk shows often navigate serious topics with moments of levity to keep the conversation accessible. Despite the lighter moment, the underlying seriousness remains. The moderator acknowledges that viewers at home may have strong opinions about what's been discussed and encourages them to engage thoughtfully. She emphasizes that disagreement doesn't have to mean disrespect, a point that feels particularly relevant given the exchange that just took place. As the segment continues, Pattinson answers a few more questions about his work, but his responses are noticeably more reflective than earlier. Sunny, for her part, maintains a composed and engaged demeanor, occasionally offering affirmations or follow-up thoughts that build on his comments rather than challenge them. The dynamic has shifted from tension to cautious collaboration. The studio audience remains attentive throughout, responding with applause at appropriate moments, but largely listening quietly. This kind of sustained attention is a sign that the discussion has resonated. It's not flashy or dramatic, but it feels real, the kind of conversation that mirrors debates happening in living rooms across the country. As the cameras prepare to move toward the next segment, there's a sense that the exchange between Pattinson and Sunny has left an impression. It wasn't resolved in the sense of one side conceding, but it reached a place of mutual acknowledgement. Both perspectives were aired, challenged, and clarified, all within the boundaries of respectful daytime television. The moderator thanks Pattinson again for joining the panel and for engaging in such an open conversation. The applause that follows is warmer this time, suggesting appreciation not just for his presence, but for his willingness to engage thoughtfully. As the show transitions onward, viewers are left with a nuanced discussion to consider, one that lingers beneath the surface and sets the stage for continued reflection as the episode unfolds. As the show moves deeper into the hour, the earlier exchange continues to influence the rhythm at the table, even as the conversation shifts again. This is something that often happens on live daytime television. Once a serious topic is introduced, it doesn't simply disappear when the subject changes. It settles into the background, shaping how everyone listens and responds. The hosts remain professional, but there's a heightened attentiveness now, a sense that everyone is choosing their words a little more carefully. The moderator transitions by acknowledging that conversations about responsibility and influence are not limited to actors or celebrities. She broadens the lens, mentioning that many people watching at home navigate similar decisions in their own lives, deciding when to speak up and when to listen. This framing invites viewers back into the discussion, making it feel less like a debate between a guest and a host, and more like a shared reflection. Sunny responds first, agreeing with the idea that these questions extend beyond fame. She talks about her background in law and journalism, explaining that she's seen firsthand how silence can be interpreted in high-stakes situations. Her tone is explanatory rather than confrontational, and she emphasizes that context matters. She's careful to note that she's not suggesting everyone must comment on everything, but that awareness of impact is crucial. Pattinson listens quietly, his hands folded loosely in front of him. When he speaks, he acknowledges Sunny's point and adds that context is often lost once a conversation moves into the public sphere. He explains that part of his hesitation comes from seeing nuanced discussions reduced to short clips or headlines that don't reflect the full intent. His voice remains calm, but there's a hint of weariness, as if this is a topic he's considered many times before. One of the co-hosts jumps in with a question that subtly reintroduces tension, though unintentionally. She asks Pattinson whether he thinks celebrities are judged more harshly for what they don't say than for what they do. The question is posed neutrally, but it invites a comparison that's difficult to answer without reopening earlier points of disagreement. Pattinson takes a breath before answering. He says that judgment seems inevitable either way and that the scrutiny can feel disproportionate at times. He adds that while criticism comes with the territory, it can still shape how people approach public engagement. As he speaks, he maintains eye contact with the panel rather than the audience, signaling that he's addressing the hosts directly. Sunny nods, then responds by saying that accountability often feels uncomfortable, especially when expectations aren't clearly defined. She points out that public figures operate in a space where personal choice intersects with collective perception. Her words are deliberate, and her expression is thoughtful, suggesting that she's trying to articulate a complex idea rather than score a point. The studio audience remains quiet during this exchange, a sign that they're listening closely. There's no laughter or applause, just the low hum of the set and the occasional shift in seats. This kind of silence can feel heavy on live television, but it also indicates engagement. Viewers at home are likely leaning in, trying to decide where they stand. The moderator senses the need to balance the conversation and brings in another co-host, asking how she views the role of empathy in public discourse. This move helps diffuse the focus on Pattinson and Sunny alone, redistributing the weight of the discussion across the panel. The co-host responds by saying that empathy requires both speaking and listening, and that knowing which to do at a given moment is often the hardest part. This comment seems to resonate with Pattinson, who nods in agreement. He adds that listening has become increasingly undervalued in a culture that prioritizes immediate reactions. He explains that stepping back doesn't always mean disengagement, but can be a way to process information more responsibly. His tone is steady, and his posture relaxes slightly as the conversation shifts away from direct disagreement. Sunny acknowledges this by saying that listening is essential, but she emphasizes that for people who feel marginalized, hearing public acknowledgement can be a form of validation. She's careful to frame this as an observation rather than a critique, and she explicitly states that she's not accusing Pattinson of indifference. This clarification is important, and it visibly softens the atmosphere. Pattinson responds by thanking her for saying that and reiterating that his intention is never to dismiss anyone's experience. He admits that navigating these expectations is challenging and that he doesn't always get it right. This admission feels genuine and seems to humanize him further in the eyes of the audience. A few people in the crowd nod along, and there's a brief, supportive ripple of applause. The moderator uses this moment to highlight the value of humility in public conversations. She notes that admitting uncertainty can be more constructive than projecting certainty where it doesn't exist. This framing helps recontextualize the earlier tension as part of a broader, ongoing conversation rather than a conflict needing resolution. As the segment progresses, the show briefly turns to viewer questions submitted online, a common feature that brings in outside voices. One question asks how public figures can engage without being performative. The moderator reads it aloud, and the panel reacts with interest. It's a question that echoes many of the themes already discussed. Sunny answers first, saying that sincerity and consistency matter more than frequency. She explains that audiences can often tell when statements are made out of obligation rather than conviction. Pattinson follows, agreeing and adding that actions aligned with words tend to speak louder over time. Their responses complement each other, signaling a moment of alignment after earlier differences. The audience reacts positively to this exchange, offering light applause. The tension that marked the earlier part of the segment has eased considerably, replaced by a sense of thoughtful dialogue. The panelists appear more relaxed, occasionally smiling or exchanging brief glances that suggest mutual respect. He says that what feels authentic for one person may not feel right for another, and that respecting those differences is important. His agreement here feels genuine, and it draws a small, appreciative nod from Sunny. The audience reacts with light applause, reflecting approval of the respectful exchange. It's not loud or exuberant, but steady, signaling appreciation for the tone rather than a particular viewpoint. This kind of response is common during moments when viewers feel a conversation has reached a thoughtful equilibrium. One of the co-hosts shifts the discussion slightly by asking Pattinson how these conversations affect his interactions off-camera, particularly with friends and colleagues. The question invites a more personal reflection without reopening debate. Pattinson answers by saying that these topics come up often in private conversations, and that hearing different perspectives has helped him refine his own views over time. Sunny adds that these private conversations are often where real understanding begins. She notes that public dialogue can open the door, but deeper engagement usually happens away from the spotlight. This comment bridges both perspectives and reinforces the idea that public and private actions don't have to be mutually exclusive. The moderator takes a moment to thank the panel for maintaining a respectful tone throughout the discussion. She emphasizes that disagreement handled thoughtfully can model constructive behavior for viewers. This acknowledgement feels earned, given the progression of the segment from tension to collaboration. As the show moves toward its final stretch, the conversation transitions more fully back to Pattinson's work. However, the earlier discussion continues to inform the questions. The hosts ask about how he chooses projects that resonate with contemporary issues without being overtly political. Pattinson explains that he looks for stories that invite audiences to reflect rather than instruct them what to think. Sunny responds positively to this approach, saying that storytelling can be a powerful way to foster empathy. She notes that films and television often reach people who might not engage with traditional commentary. Her agreement here feels like a natural extension of the earlier conversation, rather than a departure from it. The audience reacts with another round of applause, warmer this time. There's a sense that the segment has found its footing, moving from tension into productive exchange. The panelists appear comfortable, occasionally smiling or sharing brief glances that suggest rapport. As the moderator signals that time is running short, she offers Pattinson the opportunity to share any final thoughts. He uses the moment to reiterate that these conversations are ongoing and that he appreciates spaces where nuance is allowed. He thanks the panel for engaging with him thoughtfully, a gesture that feels sincere rather than obligatory. Sunny responds by thanking him for being open to discussion and for listening. Her tone is warm and her expression relaxed. This exchange feels like a quiet resolution, not because the disagreement has vanished, but because it's been acknowledged and handled with care. The studio audience applauds again, this time more fully, signaling closure. The applause isn't about victory or defeat, but about witnessing a conversation that remained grounded and respectful. It's the kind of ending that feels appropriate for daytime television, where the goal is dialogue rather than drama. As the cameras prepare to move on, there's a noticeable sense of completion to the segment. The panel resets physically, adjusting notes and posture, ready for the next topic. But for viewers, the conversation lingers, offering something to think about long after the show moves forward. This part of the broadcast reinforces what makes these moments resonate. It's not the disagreement itself, but the way it's navigated. The exchange between Pattinson and Sunny has evolved from tension to understanding, illustrating how differing perspectives can coexist without escalation. For an audience accustomed to polarized discourse, that alone makes the segment stand out. As the segment reaches its conclusion, there's a noticeable shift in energy that longtime viewers can recognize immediately. The conversation has run its course, and the show begins to wrap up the discussion in a way that feels deliberate and contained. The moderator thanks Robert Pattinson once more for joining the panel and for engaging in what she describes as a thoughtful and meaningful conversation. Her tone is steady and appreciative, signaling clearly to both the guest and the audience that the exchange is being framed as a success rather than a point of controversy. The studio audience responds with sustained applause. It's not overly loud or celebratory, but it's consistent and supportive, the kind of applause that reflects respect rather than excitement. Pattinson smiles, nods, and offers a brief wave to the crowd. His body language is relaxed, suggesting relief as well as appreciation. Sunny also smiles and claps along with the rest of the panel, her posture open and composed, reinforcing that there's no lingering tension at the table. As the show moves into its final moments, the moderator briefly previews upcoming segments, a routine part of the broadcast that helps reset the tone. This transition is smooth, and the earlier discussion is not revisited directly. However, for viewers, it remains fresh in mind, precisely because it unfolded so organically and without theatrical escalation. When the episode eventually cuts to commercial and then concludes, there's a sense that something noteworthy occurred, even though nothing about it felt forced or sensational. Immediately following the broadcast, the conversation begins to extend beyond the studio. Viewers at home start sharing clips and reactions on social media platforms, focusing largely on the exchange between Pattinson and Sunny Hostin. Many comments highlight how calmly both handled their disagreement, noting that it felt like a real conversation rather than a televised argument. Some viewers express appreciation for Pattinson's honesty about uncertainty and hesitation, while others resonate more strongly with Sunny's emphasis on visibility and acknowledgement. On social media, short clips of the exchange circulate, often accompanied by captions that frame it as a respectful disagreement rather than a clash. This framing influences how the moment is received. Instead of trending as a controversy, it becomes a point of discussion. Users debate whether public figures have an obligation to speak, with some echoing Pattinson's concern about performative statements and others supporting Sunny's argument that silence can carry meaning. In interviews and follow-up discussions, commentators note that the segment stood out precisely because it avoided extremes. Media analysts point out that daytime talk shows often walk a fine line when addressing serious topics, and this exchange is cited as an example of how differing viewpoints can be presented without alienating audiences. The calm pacing, measured tone, and mutual respect are frequently mentioned as reasons the conversation resonated. The following day, Sunny Hostin addresses the segment briefly during the show's opening moments. She clarifies that her intention was not to single out Pattinson personally, but to explore a broader issue that affects many public figures and institutions. She reiterates her respect for him and thanks him again for engaging openly. Her remarks are brief and matter-of-fact, designed to close the loop rather than reopen debate. Pattinson, for his part, references the appearance in a later interview while promoting his project. He describes the experience as positive and says he appreciated the opportunity to talk through a complex issue in a respectful setting. He emphasizes that he didn't feel attacked and values spaces where nuance is allowed. His comments further reinforce the idea that the exchange was a conversation, not a confrontation. Audience reactions continue to reflect a range of perspectives, but the overall tone remains measured. Viewers who disagreed with one side or the other often acknowledge that both viewpoints were presented fairly. Some note that seeing a male actor engage thoughtfully with a panel led by strong female voices was refreshing, while others appreciate Sunny's insistence on accountability framed through empathy rather than accusation. Over time, the moment becomes one of those segments that viewers reference when talking about why they watch daytime talk shows in the first place. It's cited in comment threads and reaction videos as an example of how live television can facilitate real dialogue. The fact that it didn't end with a definitive answer is often seen as a strength rather than a weakness. As days pass, the clip continues to circulate, but without the escalation that often accompanies viral moments. There are no dramatic headlines or ongoing feuds. Instead, the segment settles into the broader cultural conversation about voice, responsibility, and public engagement. It becomes a reference point rather than a flashpoint. Looking back, the way the segment ended feels fitting. The disagreement was acknowledged, explored, and left open, allowing viewers to draw their own conclusions. The studio audience's final applause reflects that understanding, offering appreciation rather than judgment. And that's often how the most impactful daytime television moments work. They don't rely on raised voices or dramatic exits. They unfold slowly, with tension building just enough to matter, and resolve through dialogue rather than declaration. The exchange between Robert Pattinson and Sunny Hostin fits squarely into that tradition. Now it's your turn. Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Table Turn for more narration-based talk show stories.